Hello beautiful people, my name is Kristen. Thank you for joining me today on my channel for my book reviews. These are the books that I read during the month of September. I did read a couple of digital kind of short story books by Tyler Grant. He had contacted me to see if I would read his books, and I do want to say I am willing to read new authors. I do prefer hardback or actual paper. I don't do digital. I struggle through reading digital, so that's part of my disclaimer. He sent me two books. One was only about 20 pages. It's more like a short story, and the other one, Quarantine Fever, was the digital book. I will leave his channel link below if you want to check him out. So here's what my thoughts are. He writes very creatively, and I really particularly enjoyed his dialogue and kind of sarcastic wit humor that is in the midst of it. And I know from just reading his little intro that that's the way he intends to do it, and it comes across. Now, I would personally list his stories under thriller, leaning very much towards horror, and I think he would say that as well, and I am not that girl. I'm not quite sure. You know, I am honored that he wanted me to read them, but I'm probably a bigger critic, so take that as it will. I would not have chosen it, and it's one of those things where I kind of read like this. The Rose Thorn Man was the short 20-pager, and it is, they're very reminiscent of kind of like Twilight Zone, where there's a very much a realistic kind of feel, and then there's a twist that makes it supernatural, surreal, horrific. And so it's a questioning of reality and dreams, and reminds me very much of Friday the 13th and Freddy Krueger and your nightmares being real kind of thing. So I don't want to give too many spoilers alert. It's obviously a short story, but if you like that kind of thing, you really should check out his channel. Especially, we're going into October and Halloween and all that creepy reading, y'all, so you may definitely want to check it out if that's your leaning. The Quarantine Fever is a brand new novel written in light of this year, and you know, again, it's a little bit of that Twilight Zone-esque kind of warping of reality, and maybe a possible answer. I hope it's not, but anyway, I will leave those below. That's what I'm going to say about that. The next book I want to share that I read was also sent to me by a YouTuber, Kathy at Kathy's World. I will leave her link below, and it is the God's Promise book that she wrote about her story of going through divorce. So this is a very obviously specific book. Not, you know, everybody is just going to pick this up and have a good experience with it. However, if you're going through even separation, and particularly if you have gone through divorce or going through divorce, or you know somebody who is, this is a beautiful book to gift them. She includes some of her photography pictures on every page. There is a scripture verse. There are her own thoughts, prayers, dialogue, ongoing thoughts, and just very raw and real, and yet in the midst of it, the pain and suffering going through it, looking towards that hope, knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but knowing it is really far off, and that's really painful to struggle and deal with. So if you are going through that or know somebody, hit Kathy up, see how you can get a copy of this, because I recommend this would be a beautiful, thoughtful thing to gift somebody who's going through that time, particularly if they were a person of faith. I don't think you necessarily have to be, unless you were like flat out opposed to the Christian scriptures being in here. Now, for those who have been watching my Coloring Anna Classic, they always send me a nonfiction, and there was the longest title in the universe, the Power of Onlineness. It's Make Your Wild Ideas Mighty Enough to Dent the World. And just as I suspected, this was really difficult. It took me a long time to read this, and I wanted to read it, and I wanted to give an honest review, and I wanted to try to be open to it. but it took up a lot of my time. And it's back to school month, and I work with teenagers, so didn't do as much reading. But basically, this is she is an Indian woman who was kind of promised in marriage and understands this kind of culture of having assumptions and things put on you, and then trying to break apart from that and kind of being other and sitting with different racial tensions or gender tensions or expectations, if you will, and then using that onlyness or that uniqueness or those things that you kind of feel like you need to conform to become confident and proud of them and submit them as your own ideas and going forward. And she has done this successfully into the business realm. So, somewhat interesting story, but I just read it. Now, I did read these two kind of go together as my literary appreciation. They had the Jungle Book and then a book about the author of the Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling, and then there was also the Jungly Tarzan, and this is actually 2 books. I'm counting this as 2 books read because there's 2 books in this. It's Tarzan and then Tarzan Returns. So let's talk about this one first. I had already read the Jungle Books fairly recently, so I did not reread the Jungle Books, but I read this about the author, and it is just a beautiful story because there's a lot of India that I had this month, which is awesome because I love India. But he, British, goes to India and is kind of raised there until he gets to the age that his parents wanted him to have kind of British influence, so they sent him back. But they themselves weren't ready to leave India, so he was raised by kind of a surrogate family, if you will. And so he had all these adventures and travels and back to forth kind of background that really, you could see it influential in his storytelling, particularly the Jungle Book stories and many other of his writings, just very influenced by that. And it was really fascinating to read his life story, how all those things happened, what it was like to be a young man. You know, in this, he had a sister who was kind of his partner in crime, and she showed up in different characters in his books. And so this was an enjoyable read. I really enjoyed this. And Harry Ricketts is the author of that. So if you have any interest in authors or biographies, that one was pretty good, y'all. Then, oops, these were all over the box packing, so I put them in here because I think they're cute. But Tarzan, okay, so I had never read Tarzan. I had seen like the little, animations of Jane and Tarzan and, going through the jungle, all that kind of good stuff. This isn't really that. This is a story of Tarzan, who is the baby who gets adopted by the apes. That's kind of the premise of the story, right? But it's the backstory of where he came from, his parents, all that kind of stuff, him growing up, all the details of the jungle life, how he adapts, how he takes on so many characteristics of the apes, how he first comes to understand humans and maybe his otherness and trying to find that place. And then there's an expedition of British that come and discover him, right? And he falls in love with this woman researcher. And then the second book is really him going back to civilization and trying to kind of seek after or seek out this woman. And so it's a romance story in a way. And I really struggled a lot with the second book because I really preferred the setting of the jungle life and trying to adapt that, as opposed to the interest of him trying to come across all the modern stuff, if you will. That was, still interesting, but less interesting. But anyway, I really am glad to have read the backstory of that. I felt like the writing style was extremely good. I love books. I meant to read the first little paragraph. I had this story from one who had no business to tell it to me or to any other. I may credit the seductive influence of an old vintage upon the narrator for the beginning of it, and my own skeptical incredulity during the days that followed for the balance of this strange tale. I just love those books that kind of start off like with almost a disclaimer, like, here's a story that deserves to be told, or I got passed down from this generation, or I heard this from an old gypsy woman. I don't know. I rather like that kind of breaking the curtain and talking directly to the author, and that kind of, and so that is a lot in here. Like, you're not going to believe what happened then. So if you like that in particular, that's a book for you. And then the last book that I finished this month, I went to the beach and I took a beach read, but I hadn't quite finished this one. So I'll have to put the beach read in my next month. But this one is another Fredrik Backman one. My grandmother asked me to tell you that she's sorry. And it's a fascinating little cute story. It's told predominantly through the eyes of an 8-year-old who, I don't know that she's autistic, but she's one of those ultra smart, advanced, kind of awkward in society, but more like a young adult, more even not mature, but thoughtful than even a lot of the adults around her. And there's a mysterious dog hound, and she lives in an apartment with a bunch of eclectic people, and her grandmother is kind of her best friend and kind of helps her adapt to being a little socially awkward or different by telling her stories. And it's all about the land of almost awake, and when you're just falling asleep and you're not quite asleep but you're not totally all awake, there's all these things. She tells these stories, and then of course the girl, as she's growing up, is wrestling with, what do these stories mean? And oh my gosh, some of the people and creatures and characters in these stories are real people, and what's going on. And there's some real life kind of mystery, if you will, that she's very young, but she's trying to get a grasp on some very adult concepts and stories. So it's very cute, and I really love his style of writing, and also just kind of has that thing where, you know, at the beginning of a chapter or whatever, it'll say something really random like, it never rains on Tuesdays, and then it like goes into whatever the story is, and then at the end, you know, it'll be like downpouring on a Tuesday, and it'll come back and say, it's so strange because it never rains on Tuesdays, or something like that. That's just like those little side quips that make you wonder and ask questions and then define it and pull it out later. Love that. So that was a good book. I'm not going to say I had any 5-star reading this month. Last month I had several, and this month it just felt like good, but I'm longing for that extra something. So I look forward to my October reading. I am going to read a couple that are not Halloween based, but a little more thriller, spooky, whatever. And we'll see how that goes, y'all. I look forward to sharing with you those reviews next month. Like and subscribe. Stick around. Take care.